check. All right, everyone, come on in, have a seat. We will get started. Wonderful. Hey, Mr. Godwin, did you like that Gen Z trivia? That was pretty interesting. Help you connect with your students, maybe. Hey, how many of y'all seen this meme before of Bernie Sanders with his mittens on Inauguration Day? How many of you ever seen one of those? Okay, awesome. There's some great memes. We're going to play a little game real quick. Here's what we're going to do. It's a game that we are going to play called Where's Go the first slide. Where's Bernie? Are you all ready to play real quick? Where's Bernie, okay? How many of y'all remember those Where's Waldo books you read when you were a kid? Okay, cool. This is going to be very similar. Where's Bernie? Let's see. I should have an instructions slide. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. Bernie is hiding in the picture. Be the first to yell what square he is in, okay? So here's how the squares are go. It goes 1, 2, 3. At the top, you can't see the numbers, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay? So when you see Bernie Sanders in his mittens on this screen, you shout out what number he is in. Okay? You ready? Gotta be loud though. Alright, let's see. What is it?
Whoa. 6.
6. Who said 6 first? Alright, Jacob, you said it first. Jacob's got a point. Very good. Let's see the next one. 7. Who said that? Jacob, way to go. Okay, she can spot her some Bernie. Awesome. Alright, let's see the next one. Nope. 3. Who said 3? Dr. Joe? All right, Dr. Joe's playing and he got it. Very good. All right, number 4. Who said 4? Madison got it. Madison, you got one. Awesome. All right, how about number 5? Who said 1? Sarah, very good. You never know when he's going to be creeping on you at Disneyland or wherever that is. All right. Yep, Madison got that, number 5. Man, that's good. Yeah, 7. Jordan Maples got that. Very good, Jordan. All right, and we got 2 more. Who said 5 first? I think, who said that? Alex, you got that one. I heard you first. Way to go, Alex. Man, he's even up on the Eiffel Tower. And last one? Actually, 2. Who said 2 first? I think that was Austin. Yep, Austin, you got that one. All right, and actually there is one more.
3.
Who said 3 first back here? I heard someone back here. Is that Kenzie? Awesome, so a lot of you got 1, but Jacob won with 2. Give it up for Jacob. He spotted Bernie the most. All right, got a couple announcements. Then I am going to turn over to Mr. Godwin. If you are a current senior, I need to see you right after this lesson just to talk with you guys real quick. So if you're a senior in high school, I need to see you real quick. Other than that, don't forget this Sunday night, instead of having our typical Sunday night worship service in here, we are all going to meet together with the whole church and have the Lord's Supper in the tabernacle. That is a very serious and reverent time that we have together. We've talked about it recently in lessons, so I'm really excited for us to experience. Our church doesn't do this very, very often. We do it as often as the Lord leads in Scripture, but we don't do it like every month or every week. So I want you guys to really experience what the Lord's Supper is. That will be this Sunday evening from 6 to 7 in the tabernacle. Coffee shop will still be open as it will tomorrow. So next Wednesday, I am going to be teaching a lesson on how we got our Bible in the why it is organized in the order we have it. How many of you have memorized the books of the Bible in order? Raise your hand. That's something I did at a young age too. Okay, cool. We're going to give everyone a chance. Ooh, I got this. next Wednesday, if you can list all the books of the Bible in order, I will have a candy bar for everyone who can do that, okay? For everyone who can say the list of the books of the Bible in order, I will have a candy bar for you, okay? Don't memorize now. Don't memorize now, Savannah. Okay, wait. But we're going to be talking about how our Bible is organized, and then how in the world... Yeah, Joe Kane?
I have to, up that a little bit. It
Mm-hmm.
has to be some monetary. Whatever you pay for the dollar, or pay for the candy bar, I'll match that in cash.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
How much?
You gotta, so whatever
How much
you,
is the bar of
yeah.
candy gonna cost?
Like $1.
Okay, so I'll give him $1. So you get a
In
candy bar.
addition to the candy bar?
Yeah.
Whoa.
You give him the candy bar, it's $1.
All right, so if you... Wow, okay. So Joe Kane will be here with cash in hand. Cash in hand. Katrina's idea. And he is going to be paying you $1. $1? Yes, $1. So that will be next Wednesday. Anyone can say the list of the books of the Bible in order. Then we're also going to be talking about how did we get chapters and verse divisions in our Bible? When did that come into play? When did that come into play? Did God put chapters and verses in the Bible, or did man do that? We're going to be talking about stuff like that. But if you remember 2 weeks ago, Mr. Godwin left off. We were talking about the critical race theory, racism, and the gospel response to that. And he's going to kind of build on that, talk about Charles Darwin, and why he hasn't been cultured yet. Or cultured. Why hasn't he? He's not cultured either. That's true. He has not seen any plays. Why he hasn't been canceled. So I want you to give it up for the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Mark Godwin.
I just thought of something very profound. I'm probably going to be in trouble when I get home, because on the way out, Laura, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and about 3 other people were trying to get one of our cows to stand back up. She decided she was going to chill. And when a 2,000-pound cow lays down, they can't stay that way. Her legs were out behind her, so I hope everything's going okay. But how does a black cow eat green grass and make white milk? That's pretty deep right there. Yeah, evolutionists can't answer that one either. And hopefully I won't be in trouble when I get home. So tonight, Pastor Chuck and I talked before I came in, and then he said, he's getting into the evolution thing some, and so we can talk to our cousins. He asked if I'd give a little speech lesson to begin with. So if you'd hit clip 1, we're going to start with our speech lesson and see how well you guys learn. I was going to let you practice first. Yeah. She does talk like a monkey. Actually.
Give me 1 second while I'm
Oh, you don't think it's my problem on my time? I hope it's not. I've double checked and triple checked.
Oh, I found out what it was.
641. Hey, while we're getting the technology, here's my Bible. I like to have scripture to go with what we're talking about. And this is from Romans chapter 1, verse 19. I'll read a few verses. It says, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. So they're without excuse. In other words, there's enough of revealed complexity and design in the universe, in our planet, in the human body, DNA, that you're really without excuse. You have to work real hard to explain God away. A lot of times we as Christians are we're accused of having blind faith. That faith is the will to believe despite all the evidence against God. I tend to say that faithlessness is the will to disbelieve despite all the evidence in favor of God. But at the same time, it's interesting to me that whether we're looking at God in history or whether we're looking at him through science, he always gives us the flexibility to choose. And you're going to see that tonight with some of our clips, I hope. Verse 21. Are we ready? Okay, here we go. Let's see.
Basically, that means this is me, this is Jane.
This is your instructor in college.
To go and study chimpanzees. Not just any animal, but the one most like us. The DNA of humans and chimpanzees differs by only just over 1%. They
1% difference in DNA, and she's going to be your college instructor. That's Miss Jane Goodall. She actually spent a lot of time working with chimpanzees and trying to see how we have so much in common with one another. And the percentage of DNA, that's a real fact. And sometimes that's used, well, a lot of times it's used as evolutionary scientists to point out this big family tree that we're supposedly a part of. She started changing her mind, though, about this relationship whenever she had a child and the chimpanzees tried to attack him. She thought she had built a relationship with them so they would lovingly take in her child, and they didn't do so. Then she witnessed how one group of chimpanzees just wiped out a whole other group of chimpanzees with apparently no reason. And she said that apparently chimpanzees have human savagery. I thought that was interesting. I thought maybe humans display that by acting like animals, not animals acting like us. I think she got that a little backwards. But that's what happens when you leave God out of the decision making. You start to get things backwards. And this is the perfect time to finish my verse. And we'll let Dylan say his name in chimpanzee. Because that which they knew God, they glorified him not as God. So even though they knew him, they did not glorify him. Neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations and their foolish heart. By the way, be careful of your imagination. That's how Satan gets into your head. He never comes through the front door of your head. I call it the front door of reason. It would be too obvious. He comes through the imagination. He did it to Adam and Eve when he questioned, has God really spoken? Maybe God's trying to hide something from you. Maybe God knows you can be like him. You see how he used their imagination against them to get them to doubt God? He really doesn't come up with any new game plan. He just repackages that ever so often. In our time, he has repackaged it through this idea of evolution. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And you're going to see some guys here in just a minute who are not, they're not idiots, but the things they say are contradictory to logic. And you can't do that and expect anybody to believe you. And change the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping. In other words, they started worshiping Mother Nature. They started worshiping the planet, and they started getting into things like global warming and climate change, and putting those things as if we're going to solve those problems. That's a topic for another night, though. Last week, Pastor Chuck talked, and I took notes on a couple of things that I thought were pretty cool, and I like talking about them. And I do want to deal with why doesn't culture cancel Darwin. If you're an adult here tonight, it's going to scare you what I have to show you about that, the analogy I'm going to make. The rest of you probably won't bother you too bad, unless you think about your future a lot. But last week, Pastor Chuck talked about the reliability of Scripture. All right, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls predated the oldest manuscript we had of the Bible by about 1,000 years. We had the Masoretic text that was done about 900 AD. So when you went to Isaiah chapter 53, where it talks about the suffering Messiah, people who were skeptical of the Bible said, okay, sure, Christians took it, they wrote Jesus into it, they made it look like him, they changed it. You know, they had plenty of time to do that from the death of Jesus to 900 AD. They had about 800 years. But then we found the Dead Sea Scroll. And then we found out that Isaiah scroll was written 200 years before Jesus was ever born. So no, it had not been changed. As a matter of fact, Bruce Metzger, who was a professor of New Testament studies and Old Testament studies at Princeton University, who himself was an atheist, said that there were only like 40 words between the Dead Sea Scroll and the Masoretic text, 40 words that were of issue, and there were words like to and it. They didn't dot the I or cross the T. The names of people, places, and events, perfect. Identical match. But this next video clip, you can't make this stuff up. You just can't make this stuff up. That's number 2.
Then, suddenly, they deserted Qumran. In the twinkling of an eye, the great baptismal pools lay empty. The Bible reading rooms were strangely silent. Not a single scroll was to be found. Not even a fragment was left behind. In a rush to find a hiding place for their scrolls, the Essenes hid them in these nearby caves. The unthinkable had happened. Jerusalem had fallen to the Romans in the first Jewish revolt, and now Roman legions were marching on Qumran. Ironically, it was the eve of another Jewish war 2,000 years later that finally brought the hidden scrolls to light. It was late November 1947, and the United Nations was debating a resolution on Palestine calling for the establishment of the first Jewish state since the days when Qumran and all of Israel fell to the Romans. Arab leaders were warning that if the resolution should pass, they would launch a vigorous attack on Jewish cities and villages. At the height of the tension, Dr. Sukenik, professor of archaeology at Jerusalem's Hebrew University, received an urgent message to get in touch with a Jerusalem dealer in antiquity. The British security forces had recently divided the city into military zones. No one could go from one zone to another without a special pass, a pass which neither Dr. Sukenik nor the antiquities dealer had time to obtain. As Dr. Sukenik stood on one side of the barrier and the antiquities dealer on the other, the professor strained his eyes to peer at scraps of leather the dealer held in his hands. They appeared to be fragments of incredibly ancient Hebrew scrolls. The dealer invited the professor to risk a trip through tense Arab territory to Bethlehem, where another antiquities dealer was offering for sale the complete scrolls from which these fragments were taken. There in Bethlehem, Dr. Sukenik heard an unusual tale. A Bedouin shepherd was idly tossing stones into a cave near Qumran when he heard the answering sound of stone hitting pottery. It turned out to be an ancient earthenware jar with a bundle of leather inside. In all, the cave contained 8 such jars. Back in Jerusalem, as the professor pored over 3 of the leather scrolls found in the jars, he discovered among them what scholars now recognize as the oldest biblical manuscript known to man. Outside Dr. Sukenik's residence, Jews were dancing in the streets. The UN resolution creating the Jewish state had just been passed. Ironically, the scroll was being read at the very moment that the deliverance of God's people promised in the...
So here's the question. What are the chances that this shepherd kid throws his rock and hits this pottery jar? that contains these scrolls. While there's this Hebrew professor who they can sell these scrolls to, who can translate them. While he's translating the Isaiah scroll that says God's going to gather his people from the four corners of the earth and bring them back into the land of Israel. While he's reading it, outside his apartment, they're celebrating it, and 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean in New York City, they're making it come true into reality. If you find those scrolls a week earlier, 2 weeks earlier, maybe a month later, but while he's reading it, what was written 2,000 years ago is happening outside his apartment. That's why I say people who reject that, they have the faithlessness is the will to disbelieve. They're purposefully disbelieving because you can't make this stuff up. Our president at that time, the UN, when they met in New York City, our president had been Franklin Roosevelt for many years. He was our president during the Great Depression through World War II. He said when this vote comes up in the UN, the United States will not support giving the Jews their land back. He said, I won't have any of it. He said, now I love the Jewish people. He said, I love me some Albert Einstein because he came over here from Germany. Hitler ran him out of Germany because he was a Jew, and he ran into our open arms, and he helped us build the first atomic bomb, which helped us win World War II and put us in the driver's seat through the Cold War. All right, so our welcoming the Jews and supporting a Jew worked out real well for us. So why was he against giving the Jews their land back? He said if we give them their land back, there will be never-ending conflict in the Middle East because the Arabs won't stand for it. And he was right about that. But he said, I'll invite the Jews to come and live with us in the United States. Those who want to get out of Germany, those who live through those camps. He said, I'll invite them to come, but I'm not going to vote for that. Well, guess what happened the next few days? He had a heart attack at his home in Georgia, and he died. I'm telling you, you can't make this stuff up. It's true. Guess what? His vice president, same political party, Democrat, Harry Truman, his grandmama, when he was a kid, read the Old Testament to him, talked about how one day God was going to fulfill his promise through the Jewish people. He was going to bring them back into their land. And he realized he was the man who could make it happen. So he took the total opposite approach that Franklin Roosevelt did, and he signed the United States on to giving the Jews their land back and Israel becoming a country again. That stuff doesn't happen by accident. And it should give you confidence in Scripture. Another thing Pastor Chuck talked about last week were scoffers. Peter said that there would come a time where people would say, okay, it's been 2,000 years since Jesus came, and he probably ain't coming back. And they did the same thing to Noah. And, Noah preached for like 100 years that there's a flood coming, that God does deal with sin. God's going to make things right. Justice is going to win. And nobody got on the boat with him. But they sure made fun of him. Now, in this next clip, I want you to notice the sarcasm with which the word miracles are used. And I want you to notice what this guy does whenever Noah mentions the word creator. All right, that's God. Can you play that next clip for me, bro? This would be like Noah's distant uncle.
When I heard talk of miracles,
You listen.
I dismissed them.
dismissed
Then I
miracles.
saw the birds with my own eyes, and I had to come.
There isn't anything for you here.
No. This all belongs to me. This land, this forest, that stronghold of yours. Did you really think you could protect yourself from me in that?
It's not protection from you.
Then what is it?
An ark. To hold the innocent when the Creator sends his deluge to wipe out the wicked from this world.
Return to your cities of Cain. No, we have all been judged.
I have men at my back, and you stand alone and defy me?
I'm not alone.
So did you see his expression, his body language, whenever Noah said the Creator's going to, what did he do? He goes, you got to be kidding me. You really believe that stuff? That was only 2,000 years removed from the creation. Some of these guys, like Noah, didn't miss talking to Adam in person by many years. And yet, that time, what did Jesus say about the last days? It would be like it was in the days of Noah. You would have scoffers. A few years ago, they had a really good debate between Ken Ham. He built the Ark Encounter up in Kentucky, and Bill Nye the Science Guy. And I want you to notice Bill's body language whenever Ken Ham says a creator God on the next clip.
Natural law hasn't changed. As I talked about, I said we have the laws of logic, the uniformity of nature, and that only makes sense within a biblical worldview anyway, of a creator God who set up those laws, and that's why...
You see, in the minute he said creator, Bill Nye, what are you talking about? The same body language, same thing. As long as Ken Ham was talking about natural law, Bill Nye was focused in listening to him. The minute he mentioned creator, now you're talking supernatural. Did you notice how that guy, when he was talking to Noah, he used the word miracles so sarcastically? When I heard talk of miracles, I dismissed them. Notice this next dialogue between. Now, this is a few years later. Ken Ham invited Bill Nye to visit the ark that he built, and Bill Nye just shows up one day. He took him up on it. Notice what happens when Ken Ham, or when Bill Nye talks about miracles.
And see, what we're talking about here, and this is the whole point that we're helping people understand. We all live in the present, we all have the same present evidence, but depending on your assumptions and how you approach your worldview, depends on how you interpret evidence in relation to the past. Because you believe everything happened by natural process, you don't believe the history in the Bible, right? In Genesis.
Well, not literally.
No, I do. And see, that's a big difference. So all I want you to do is admit that you have certain beliefs, your stuff.
My beliefs are based on evidence. I think
your belief. How can you prove life arose by natural processes? How do you prove that?
We haven't proven it.
Well, then that's a belief.
Yes, but the explanation that you provide is completely unreasonable to me and unacceptable, and we reject it in science.
Unreasonable by whom?
Well, as soon as you go back in time,
you can't go back in time. We live in the present.
In your worldview, as soon as you produce a miracle, then you're not doing science.
So as soon as I talk about a miracle, I'm not doing science. But whenever Ken Ham asked him to explain how did life arise through natural processes, that means blind, mindless, unguided, keeping God out of it, he said, we don't know. So he doesn't want a miracle involved, but he's perfectly willing to accept magic, that something came from nothing, that life came from non-life. You're going to see in a minute. That's the only law in science we do know about life. Pasteur, the guy who did the pasteurization with milk, he came up with it. He said you can only get life from life. Life never comes from non-life. So Bill Nye's biggest problem is not that he's not willing to accept what he cannot know. He's willing to accept magic, that something came from nothing, life came from non-life. He just does not want to accept God. And listen what he says about Noah's Ark in this clip.
Of a worldwide flood that somehow influenced everything that we observe in nature. A 500-foot wooden boat, 8 zookeepers for 14,000 individual animals, every land plant in the world underwater for a full year. I ask us all, is that really reasonable?
If you notice, he uses that word reasonable a lot. He used it in the other conversation when they were looking at the Ice Age at the Ark. Where do we get this word reason from? We get it from the time of the Enlightenment. In the 1700s, you had the Age of Enlightenment where reason took the place of revelation. Our ability to reason replaced any need to have something revealed from God. It's where God got put as the co-pilot instead of the pilot. But then the things they say do not reflect what they claim. Just a minute ago, he told Ken Ham that he does not accept the Bible as history. not literal history. It didn't happen that way. It's a fairy tale. But listen to this interview here he had. I think this is Larry King, maybe, interview. Yeah.
Go. You know, I think one of the things that Star Trek has always been is a hopeful vision of the future. There's so much dystopian representation of the future in popular culture these days. I think Star Trek's value as a hopeful, optimistic look at the future. I'd like for it to just continue to be that beacon of hope for people because, as I said, I mean, we are all talking about, we're doing nothing but obsessing with the zombie apocalypse and teaching each other that, you know, you need to be good with an axe in order to survive. It's more than that. You really need to learn how to be a human being.
Tom Sampson on Facebook asked, Bill, those in the United States who publicly claim no religious affiliation have risen considerably over the last 2 decades. This recent shift, does it affect the interest in science?
Well,
if we go away from religion, do we go towards science?
I think what happens when you go towards science, you go away from religion. People get a lot out of religion. They get community. That's what people want.
And a feeling of something's coming.
And it's very hard to accept for many of us that when you die, it's over. That's really hard for a lot of people. But with that said, my concern has always been you can't use tax dollars intended for science education to teach something akin to the Earth is 10,000 years old. Because that's just wrong. I mean, it's very much analogous to saying the Earth is flat. I mean, then you can show the Earth is not flat. You can show the Earth is not 10,000 years old. That's it. We're not teaching that.
So why do they continue to believe it?
So apparently, people with these deeply held religious beliefs, they embrace that whole literal interpretation of the Bible as written in English as a worldview, and at the same time, they accept aspirin, antibiotic drugs, airplanes, but they're able to hold these two worldviews, and this is a mystery.
The Bible as history book.
The Bible is full of history, but it's not a science text.
It's not a science text.
Yeah.
It is full of history. It is full of the history of humanity and the evolution of culture, but it is not a scientific document.
Well, just a minute ago, Bill said it wasn't a history book. Now he says it is a history book, and be careful, listen to what they say. He said a Christian will accept aspirin and antibiotics and airplanes, but will not accept the earth is 4.5 billion years old or the universe is 13.5 billion years old. Okay, why do we accept the first three? They're testable, repeatable, and observable. Why do I not accept the other conclusion? Because it's not testable, repeatable, and observable. It falls out of the realm of science. Okay? And you need to remember this, folks. There's been no discovery made, there's been no invention made that needed the earth to be billions of years old or the universe to be billions of years old. So what's the big deal? I'll tell you what the big deal is. They don't really care about the age of the earth or the age of the universe, but they need those numbers to be in the billions for what they do care about, what they do want to convince you of, and that is evolution. Evolution can't happen if the earth is 6,000 years old. So if they cave and say, okay, we get it. There's nothing about our view of an old earth or old universe that needs to be true for inventions or discoveries that have been made, but they're never going to let that go. And they're never going to take it out of science books because then they have to let go of evolution. Those two ideas go hand in hand. They're very much so connected. But I wanted you to see Bill and I make those comments because if you sell yourself to a worldview that's incoherent and inconsistent, the last clip you see tonight will make all the sense in the world to you. And that's what it is. He contradicts himself time after time after time. And listen, the truth doesn't contradict itself. The truth meets two requirements. It's applicable to you, and then it's transferable to other people. If something is applicable just for you, but it's not transferable to other people, then it's not the truth. Then it's your preference or your opinion. And these guys are determined not to let God have a chance. They're not going to give God a chance. And I want you to understand this, okay? Well, this guy here is not an atheist. He calls himself an anti-theist. He hates God. And I've never played a clip of him before, but we need to meet this guy. He's on the right.
Look, you want your God to take responsibility for the huge number of collapsing stars and imploding galaxies and destroyed universes and failed solar systems that have left us in this tiny corner on the one planet in this petty solar system that can support life some of the time.
So Christopher Hitchens, an anti-theist, he looks at the universe and he says, you got this little pale blue dot here, and that's Earth. And it's the only place that can support life, and only some places on Earth can support life. And he looks at the other 99% of the universe as a huge waste of space. And when he sees that, what he calls chaos or no design, he blames God for it. He says, you want to believe in a designer like that? All right, so they blame God when things look to show chaos or disorganization. But then look what they do when they have evidence for design. This is Richard Dawkins next.
Forward TV. The world is thinking.
Do you think there could be one sentence that could convince, let's say, a creationist to seriously doubt their theory? Ideally, if you could convince a believer in God to really doubt their belief, but that's too hard.
Not sure about a sentence. I think perhaps the single most convincing fact, the observation that you could point to would be the pattern of resemblances that you see when you compare the genes using modern DNA techniques, actually looking at the letter-to-letter correspondences between genes. Compare the genes of any pair of animals you like, pair of animals, pair of plants, and then plot out the resemblances, and they fall on a perfect hierarchy, a perfect family tree. And the only alternative to it being a family tree is that the intelligent designer deliberately set out to deceive us in the most underhand and deviant.
Okay, now what was Richard Dawkins talking about? He's talking about design, he's talking about DNA, he's talking about an information system. 26 letters in the alphabet make 400,000 words. And then 4 nucleic acids, A, T, G, and C, DNA, make all the necessary combinations for amino acids, for proteins that build cells, that build tissue, that build organs, that build organ systems. Everything's built on this information system, just as it is an alphabet. And instead of seeing design in that and intelligence behind it, he sees that as reason to believe, because we have such a high percentage similarities in DNA to a chimpanzee that we're cousins. But even Bill Gates says, my information system, Microsoft, is similar to DNA, but not nearly as sophisticated and advanced. And that's spoken by an atheist. Bill Gates is an atheist. So even when God gives evidence of design, they want to take it in another direction from him. Then when everything looks like chaos, such as the universe not being habitable for life except on earth, then they blame God for that. But God can't win with them because they have, it's like it says in Romans, they have purposed to disbelieve. No amount of evidence would satisfy them. Notice what his name is Krauss. He's from Arizona State. Notice what he says.
You give me the laws of polar molecules, and I'll give you a snowflake. There's no intent, no grand purpose, no design behind it, even though they look designed. The illusion of design is an illusion.
Stop.
Natural law does indeed.
Yeah, he says anytime a scientist, one of us evolutionists, anytime we see design, we have to remind ourselves it's an illusion. What is that? That's nonsense. And so you got to remember, when you have these people who have master's degrees and they have doctorate degrees, nonsense is nonsense even when spoken by an expert. These teachers that tell you that all truth is subjective, just ask them, does that statement include itself or exclude itself? If it includes itself, then what they said may not be true. It may be subjective. If it includes itself, then they're trying to say all truth is subjective while making an absolute statement. They just contradicted themselves. But you That's why the church needs to have these conversations. I was reading yesterday, in Islamic countries, they train up to 20,000 apologists a year in Islamic mosques throughout the Middle East. And the number one thing they throw at Christians is this: Jesus never said he was God. They'll hand you a copy of the King James and you show me a quote where Jesus said, I am God. And of course he did claim equality with God. He said that his name shall be called what? Emmanuel, which means God with us. But it doesn't fit their criteria. But at least they're training their people to question other worldviews. That's what we need to be doing. I'm thankful Pastor Chuck is challenging you in that. So then, what do evolutionists believe? What do they teach kids off at college campuses about how life originated? Here's a video. You may see this one day, depending on where you go to school.
Well, does someone have a theory about how life began?
This is the story of a small planet in space called Earth.
For a typical Darwinian explanation of how life originated, Dr. Wells directed me toward this documentary.
The chemical elements essential for life, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, were now in place. What was needed was a way of combining them. Perhaps the energy came from lightning. Whatever it was.
Excuse me?
Whatever it was, energy managed to arrange these chemical ingredients in just the right way.
Whatever it was? I was hoping for something a little more scientific. The most popular idea has been that life emerged spontaneously from primordial soup. In 1953, Stanley Miller mixed water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to simulate the early Earth's atmosphere. Then he ran electricity through it in an attempt to jumpstart life. It didn't work. While the initial results...
Yeah, so see, all this stuff's been tried. There are theories that sometime in the distant past, lightning hit the primordial oceans and then mitosis, cellular division started taking place. They've tried to do testable, repeatable, observable, and it does not work. Let's look at information. This is the most important thing, I think, to understand. This is from the National Human Genome Research Institute, so this is not the Baptist Theological Seminary or anything like that.
Genetic code is the term we use for the way that the 4 bases of DNA, the A, C, G, and T's, are strung together in a way that the cellular machinery, the ribosome, can read them and turn them into a protein. In the genetic code, each 3 nucleotides in a row count as a triplet and code for a single amino acid. So each sequence of 3 codes for an amino acid. And proteins are made up of sometimes hundreds of amino acids. So the code that would make one protein could have hundreds, sometimes even thousands of triplets contained in it.
And did you hear the terminology they use? Cellular machinery. You can't use that kind of terminology if you're expecting people to believe it is a result of blind, mindless, unguided chance. Machinery requires what? A machinist. Programming, if you're going to call it a program, it requires a programmer. So they contradict themselves in what they say. This is probably the best description of information and how it applies to design that I've ever heard. This is Dr. Werner Gitt. He's a German dude, and he makes a great analogy on DNA and information systems.
It is from Pasteur coming, he said, life is only coming from life. It is the only law of nature we know about life. Let's have a look to systems which are based on information. On this picture you see a walking machine. It has 6 legs and there is a computer installed and a special program, and so this machine can walk on plane and unplane surfaces. It can go upstairs and downstairs and so on. What is the most important detail on this machine? Of course, it is the program. The program allows it to do it. If we would delete the program, then it cannot work. Now, let's have an idea about this working machine. If we would weigh the complete system, we will find a special value of the complete machine. Afterwards, we will delete the information, and then we would weigh it once again. What do you think about the weight of the complete system after deleting the information? Will it have more, less, or the same weight? Of course, it has the same weight. What is the conclusion? Information is not a part of matter. Information is a non-material entity, a very, very important.
So he says information is a non-material entity. It is non-physical. He used illustration like you take a computer, say it weighs, a desktop weighs 8 pounds, right? But it does nothing. They can't sell it to you like that. So they put that disk in there and they download that information, that program onto that 8-pound computer. But then they take the disk back out. So it still weighs the what? But then it does spreadsheets and Word documents and PowerPoints. The information is there, it's real, but it's non-physical. Who does that sound like? God. Yeah. Information identifies with God. So it's like saying, in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was information. And there's your evidence right there. That's the strongest evidence for God. But look at how he takes it to another comparison.
Conclusion. On this picture you see a stick insect. It is also a working machine, a biological working machine. It has also 6 legs. And we can say it has also a program installed that it can walk in all kinds of bushes and trees and so on. If we would delete this program, it cannot work.
Yeah, you see that? Connection right over to life. Sunday, Bethany and Brianna gave me a document right here Sunday about Chuck Colson, prison ministry. And Chuck Colson was a very intelligent man, a very powerful man. He worked for President Nixon, but he was involved in a secret cover-up. Him and only 2 other guys knew about it. They still couldn't keep it secret. He ended up going to prison for it. It was called Watergate. And he said that back in that time, before he was a Christian, he had the philosophy that what I do is not wrong unless I get what? There are no objective moral values. In other words, if Hitler would have killed every Jew in those concentration camps, would that have made Hitler right? No, because objective moral values exist. What Hitler did was wrong, even if he had succeeded at wiping out everybody involved and nobody knew what he did. Even though nobody would have known what Hitler did, he was still wrong. That's only true if objective moral values exist, and objective moral values only exist if God exists. Charles Darwin said, and I got this from you guys, very good quote, I fully subscribe to the judgment of those writers who maintain that of all the differences between man and the lower animals, the moral sense or conscience is by far the most important. See, Darwin couldn't explain where it come from. And you're going to get into college and you're going to get a class maybe on evolutionary ethics, how ethics can produce some way we treat each other. I heard a debate between a Christian and an atheist, and he said, how do you tell the difference between right and wrong? And the guy said, well, the same way I tell the difference between blue and green. And the Christian said, well, that's how you see. And the atheist said, okay, it's my feelings tell me the difference between right and wrong. And a Christian said, in some parts of the world, people love their neighbors. And in some parts of the world, believe it or not, people eat their neighbors. They're still cannibals in the South Pacific. And then he asked the atheist, do you have a preference? I think we all have a preference, don't we? I'd rather be loved by my neighbor than eat by my neighbor. Why? Why? Because of objective moral values. Thou shalt not kill. So evolution cannot explain objective moral values. at all because it eliminates the transcendent. You know, think about an umbrella, all right? And that in that umbrella that's over us, that was not put there by us, and it's something we can observe and that we can see, but we can't change it. It's like truth. It's always the same. What happens when you remove the transcendent? That's God. When you remove the transcendent, you remove objective moral values. And this is the best analogy I could ever give you right here. All right? It's about money. You get me in my wallet, you get me hard. Okay?
Why didn't the races like each other?
Yeah, let's
This
go
is
to
a
the
problem.
next one, brother. It's
from the
U.S.
where the
number 14.
white come.
Number 14. This is gonna scare you. Look at them numbers, how fast they're flying up there. Can you pause it for a minute, bro? Okay, this is our national debt. It's at $27 trillion. This is how much we're worth, $21 trillion, as a country, as the United States. That means we're hurting bad, and let me show you how bad. Our debt is 130% of what we're worth. We are bankrupt, is what I'm trying to say. How did that happen? Look, back in the 1960s, our debt was only half of our worth, meaning that we could pay it off when we needed to. But now, we've doubled from the 1960s to now. How did that happen? Can you pause it for just a second? Because this fixing to skip to the good news. How did that happen? Why does the government just print money? Have you heard the conversation here recently about $600 stimulus check to people, and then somebody said 2,000, and somebody said, well, that's too much, and then the other guy says, look, we're just printing money anyway. How did that happen where we say that about money? If you ask any economist what is the value of the dollar, they can't tell you, because we disconnected ourselves from its transcendent value. What was the transcendent value of the dollar? Does anybody remember? Gold standard. At one point, we could not infuse more paper money into our economy than that we had gold to back it up. But then, I think it was President Nixon, he disconnected us from the gold standard. That's why, if you look, there is no standard, and we are bankrupt economically, bankrupt monetarily. Now, I don't have enough time to go into, well, why are we still functioning? Why is the dollar still worth something? That would be a class on economics. But you see, we're in the red. That's what we owe. That's what we make. That is more, that is less. That's how much more it is. We are bankrupt. You can't live that way. All right? What's the alternative to that? What's the alternative to not being economically bankrupt? Can you keep playing it? And we're going to go to North Carolina. Eventually, I click up here somewhere, and I go to the state debt clock. And I want to show you the difference between our federal government and our state government. And then I want you to understand why. Here we go. All right, pause it, bro. Notice here that our debt to asset ratio, what we owe, is only 8% of what we worth, or what we're worth in North Carolina, which means we can pay that off. Everybody carries some type of debt, but can you pay it off if you have to? Our federal government can't. Our state government can. Does that mean we're smarter in North Carolina than Washington? Probably. Probably. But there's a bigger picture. Does anybody think they know? And it has to do with what happens when you take away the transcendent, the authority. See, used to our federal government had to work within the transcendent authority of the gold standard. But when they removed it, they bankrupted us. If you remove God, you bankrupt us morally. That's what we've done too. If you notice, this trend that started in the 60s with money, it also started on university campuses with morality. Go back and study your history. All this stuff now that we're dealing with about fluid gender and LGBTQ and transgender and all that stuff, listen to me. That didn't start yesterday. It didn't. It started 60 years ago. And those things are bad ideas. Now, God loves all people, and we as Christians should love all people. We're not called to judge people. We're called to judge ideas. We're called to show compassion without compromising what we believe. We're called to show good judgment without being judgmental. All right? But you can go to the CDC website, the place that tells us to wash our hands. By the way, they got that from the Bible. Leviticus tells you to wash your hands under running water. They tell you that people who pursue an LGBTQ lifestyle run a 10% higher chance of health issues that their counterparts who don't choose that lifestyle don't have to worry about. It's there. It's on their website. That's a bad idea. It's not about saying bad people, good people. We all have the potential to be bad people. That's called sin. But what happens when you remove a transcendent morality, then they really don't talk about sin anymore. You don't ever really hear that hear that word on the medium. It is the most evidential fact in our culture, but the most hotly debated. Sin everywhere, you can see it. But when you call it that, you know what they do? Oprah or somebody will call in an expert from somewhere who will explain it as, oh, that's okay. They're just born that way. That's not what God says. God says we make choices. So, does anybody know why the federal government went bankrupt, but North Carolina's in good shape economically? We didn't let go. Do you know why? Do you know why? Do you think you know? Yeah, share it.
Is it because you need to make sure what you're taking out is not going to be better at controlling it than what you're going to substitute?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you take out one thing from your life, you need to make sure, like if it's something vital, like sleep, you need to make sure, like if I just said, okay, I'm gonna stop sleeping, well, like, what am I gonna do? Like, is there something I can substitute for that is gonna be better? So when they took that out, then they're like, oh, we can do this. Did they really think about it? Like, maybe that was better for that need of our country than they were.
Mm-hmm.
And for North Carolina, it's smaller, so it's easier for us to handle than the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's the question. What's keeping those guys in Raleigh in our General Assembly from putting their hand in the cookie jar and getting more cookies out? Because the federal government will give you loans all the time, so you can go in more and more debt. What's keeping them from doing that? Is it just because they're better people? No. It's because in North Carolina, in our Constitution, we have a balanced budget amendment. It's a transcendent authority that those guys cannot get around. They have to follow it. Just like transcendent morality, the expectations that God places over us. They're part of reality. You can try to ignore them, but the consequences always come back around. So that's the difference. Our federal government has no transcendent authority. There is no balanced budget amendment. That's why they're out of control economically. And when you remove God and a transcendent morality, we become out of control morally. We become bankrupt morally. Last week, Savannah and Dylan were the first ones to come up to me, and the question was, why, with Darwin being such a racist with what he said about Aborigines, Indians needing to be exterminated, and other races of people he considered lower than white people, how has he not been canceled? And it has everything to do with this idea of a transcendent morality. Because what Darwin took from us with one hand, God, he gave us something in exchange with the other hand. And that's no way to say something is a moral absolute. There's no way to say there's an objective moral truth because there's no moral lawgiver. And that's a powerful idea that appeals to humans. How do I know that? Well, ask Adam and Eve. And that's what Satan did. It's the same thing he offered them. You don't have to listen to God. You can be like God. It's the same thing Darwin was offering us with his theory of evolution bundled up in a scientific package, because when he came along, we were in the age of the Enlightenment where the reason of man had dispelled the need for revelation from God. This guy here's an atheist. He wrote a book about it. It's called The Devil's Delusion. That's kind of funny, isn't it? He's an atheist and he wrote a book called The Devil's Delusion. Mm-hmm. There's some atheists out there that you can listen to, pretty smart guys. I got some video clips of him, maybe Pastor Chuck will let me share sometime. He's got some colorful language, but I'll clean that out, I promise. All right, guys, so there you go. That's why Darwin will not be canceled, because though he took God from us, he gave us what we get or think we get without God. But what we really get is counterfeit money, monopoly money. You can't really use it in the real world, and you go bankrupt morally. Well, it's 7:30, brothers.
You don't want to play the last clip?
Is that the one about Rwanda?
That's Billy Graham.
Oh, man, you need to see. Y'all got time to see this?
We got 3 minutes.
Dude, you got to see this. This will blow your mind. Billy had to go through what you were going through in school and college. Let's see what happened with Billy. This is his best friend, who trained him how to be a preacher.
Billy, you know, the world has grown so much more complex just in the last 50 years. And people seeking the truth can no longer accept the simple rhetoric that you were raised with and preach with. When are you going to get that? That old-time religion, it's not good enough for me, and it's not good enough for you either, Billy.
Charles, outspoken young man.
No,
Bless
Connie.
his heart.
Actually, I'm doing him a big favor. You see, people no longer accept the Bible as being divinely inspired. There are too many inconsistencies, lapses, lacunae. How could any of us presume that a document written by men is the sacrosanct, inalienable word of God? It is a fairy tale.
Well, 2,000 years ago, the Bible prophesied that God would gather his chosen people from the four corners and reunite them in their homeland. And
God didn't create the state of Israel. Man did. The UN did. After 6 million Jews, God's own chosen people, were burnt and gassed in the ovens of Hitler. 6 million people, Billy, all praying to their God to be spared, and not one prayer answered. Is that your loving God? Can you find his face in the ovens of Auschwitz, Billy, or the firestorms of Nagasaki, or the bombs of Dresden? I'm asking you, how could a loving God have done that?
Charles, God didn't do that. Man did.
Well, then he permitted it. Didn't he stood by? And you're out there, Billy. You're out there preaching the good news. What good news?
It's good news that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten.
Billy, I believe that Jesus is the most perfect moral being in the history of the world. I believe that Jesus is the greatest teacher.
I know it's getting time to go. Listen, the guy on the left, he was Billy Graham's mentor. His name was Charles Templeton. He was known as the man who speaks for God. Obviously, he's had a change of heart, you see here. And he was challenging Billy Graham to join him. He says that old-time religion is not good enough for me, and it's not good enough for you either. Of course, Charles here is speaking without benefit of the Dead Sea Scrolls. When he said man created the state of Israel, not God, he's saying that at the same time the Dead Sea Scrolls have just been discovered, and he does not have the benefit of that. But you see in two men the choice God gives each of us. God gives us the evidence. Billy Graham went on and spoke to more people than any other person in history, the greatest evangelist in history. His friend, Charles Templeton, became an atheist and then a professor of biology at Princeton University, and died that way. So that may be a family member you have to interact with one day. That may be a friend who means a lot to you one day. And you want to be able to interact with them and talk with them because you may make a huge difference in their future. A huge difference in their future. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the confidence that we can have in your word. And Father, we thank you for all the evidence